Hey, welcome back to KP Unpacked. My name is Jeff Echols. I'm a senior advisor at KP Reddy Co., and I am joined, as usual, by KP Reddy. He is the CEO and founder of KP Reddy Co., also the founder of Shadow Ventures. And this is my opportunity. He knows this. I say this every week, but I'm not sure he actually believes it. But this is like the time when I have a captive audience with KP and I get to say, hey, what were you thinking? You're posting all these things on LinkedIn. What were you thinking when you posted that? I get to ask KP every week about something that he posted on LinkedIn. What was the inspiration? What's the background for that? Tell me more. Tell me more about that story. If you're not following KP Reddy on LinkedIn, you should be. It's just KP, Reddy, KP Reddy on LinkedIn. You're probably not going to be able to connect with him because his connections limit is usually met, but you can certainly follow him. He posts 2 or 3 times a day usually, and lots of great insights, often some pot stirring going on, and also some personal stories, which is the basis of the post that we're going to dig into today. So KP, welcome.
Hey, Jeff.
Glad you're here today. You have moved to California now. I guess we've mentioned this a couple times, but you've moved to California.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in Indianapolis. We had snow about 3 days ago, and today it's 80.
Nice.
What's it like in California today?
65.
Yeah, same old.
65. Where I'm at, it's like always 65.
You guys are boring.
Someone said, we don't have weather, we have climate. That's what someone told me the other day.
Yeah. So the deal in the Midwest is, hey, if you don't like the weather, wait 30 minutes and it'll change.
Yep.
The deal is, if you don't like the weather where you are, I guess you have to move.
No, we should drive 30 minutes over the hill, and it's like.
There you go. Drive 30 minutes.
Yeah, go drive 30 minutes.
All right. Well, that's good to know. We either wait or we drive. The weather will change, and the post that we're going to unpack today, which I'll read here in a minute, and then we'll talk through it. It's about change. It's about change in your career and in your early career, as it were. I just hosted our virtual demo day, which I host the final Friday of every month, and I had noticed in the audience that there were a couple folks from our early and mid-career mastermind group in the audience. So that was really cool to see. And I think this post and what we discussed today will really resonate with them, because it is about your first job in engineering. So let me read it, and then we will unpack it as the title goes. In my first engineering job, I walked into my boss's office and I resigned. He responded, "It's about time." He always understood that my ambition, because it matched his own, or maybe even surpassed his own. At some point, he said that my ambition was exceeding his ambition, and he knew that he was holding me back. Your ambitions should be clear to your boss. If your boss isn't at least as equally ambitious as you, find a new boss. In AEC, I see a lot of innovation roles reporting to people that are not ambitious or curious, yet they stick around. Don't do it. Move on and find a new boss, or be your own boss. You know, it's funny. I mentioned their early and mid-career. This definitely touches on that realm, right? Our early and mid-career mastermind group, but also we have 2 innovation leaders mastermind groups. And I'm not saying you're calling anybody out here. Maybe you are, maybe you aren't. You can reveal that if you like. But these are the people generally in these 2 mastermind groups that you're talking about, right? They're the ones that are leading innovation in firms, a chief innovation officer, director of innovation, those types of roles in those mastermind groups. And the irony is they're leading innovation and sometimes reporting up to some people that are not. So turn the clock back. I could probably figure out exactly how many years here, but turn the clock back to this point in time where you walked into your boss's office and resigned, and then let's unpack it from there.
Yeah. So the year was 1997. So for some of our emerging people, they're like, that was before I was born.
It was way before they were born.
It could be, yeah. And it was an interesting dynamic because I worked for a very large engineering firm, and yeah, I was a good enough engineer. I wasn't like the best or anything, but I was really good with clients, mostly just because I took the time to talk to them.
Hmm.
And I figured out early in my career that I would go up, I'd walk by the receptionist every day, and there'd be a stack of those while you were out messages.
Oh yeah.
And so one day I asked her, like, what is that? It's like, oh, those are all the like people call us wanting services. They call and leave messages. I'm like, well, who follows up with those? She's like, nobody. These damn engineers don't seem to care. I was like, oh, give them to me. I'll
Interesting.
start calling them. That's all I did. I was like, I'll start calling them back. That's kind of rude. Don't call people back. And so I started calling these people, right? So next thing you know, I'm driving a ton of business, like more business than anyone. And then next thing you know, I'm like going to my boss. And of course, I'm making like 26,000 a year at the
Hmm.
time. And my boss tried to like keep giving me raises and promotions up until the top of the pay band, right? The most he could
Right.
do.
Right.
He did that. After he exhausted that, he would buy me gift cards to Longhorn Steakhouse and Outback Steak. That was about it. Like I was like tapping him out basically. Um, and so I think he quickly figured out like, hey, this guy's not gonna like just hang out. And he was a super interesting guy because he was not an engineer. He was in the Vietnam War, happened to serve with someone at our firm, and he started off as like a concrete technician. He'll tell you like got really good at golf, so got good at business development and was able to drive business. So he kind of appreciated that I was out there driving business. So anyway, so I think a lot of what he saw was just that he was not going to be able to keep me. And then when I started my startup on the side, he thought it was like game over at that point. Um, but it's this pattern, and it's an interesting pattern from him onwards. Um, I think I really, that company I started went from 2 people to 1,200 people in like 3 years, went public, and I was a really good boss up to about 20 people, and after that, I was a pretty bad boss because basically I can't have people that work for me directly, like on a daily basis, that are not equally or more ambitious than me. I don't understand it. I used to try to like, people would coach me like, well, everybody's in different situations and different positions, and you have to have diversity. I'm like, yeah, they can report to someone else, not me. Right. That's kind of my conclusion. And I'd have people say, oh, that's not fair. But I mean, I've had people work for me. I had a guy that was my receptionist who's now a partner at one of the big five consulting companies. Started off as because he was ambitious. He would like stay, when I was in the office late, he was right there with me, would ask what I was doing, wanted to learn, would offload stuff to like just was constantly trying to improve himself and create opportunities to earn more. And I was like, yeah, sure. Like I'll give you infinite opportunities. In fact, he was like running a big department for the state of Georgia at one point. So there's been a lot of people that have had that equal or exceeding ambition that have worked for me and have gone on to do, pretty amazing things. But there was a time in my career where it's like, oh, well, not everybody has to be as ambitious as I am. That's okay. Some people it's just a job. And then really I've gotten to where like, yeah, we can hire those people. They just can't report to me because it'll be equal frustration. Right. I slack at 2 in the morning. If you don't respond, like then you're not ambitious. Right. That's just how that is. Right. And so that's fine. There's always those roles. But I think when you're younger, you tend to pattern the behavior of the people you report to. And if your boss shows up at 9 and takes 2 coffee breaks and it's all about their quality of life, which good for them, right? And if yours is more like, no, I want to be CEO, then that's the wrong person. Find a different person to report to. And I think that's why, like, my work with startups and all the founders I work with, they are all very, they're all, equally, if not more ambitious than I am, right? They're all trying to build unicorn companies and work 24/7. And, and they respond to my, they're funny. Like I respond to their Slacks. I had one Slack me today at 3 a.m. He's like, "What the hell are you doing up?" I'm like, "I'm up, like sleep optional, like I get plenty of sleep, which is funny enough, but people perceive I don't sleep. I get plenty of sleep actually. But I think early in your career, if you pattern people that are very content, you will pattern them and become that content person and not that ambitious person. And I think it's a problem because I think so. So if we look at the very beginning of things, a lot of people that go into civil engineering or construction, it's because maybe they want a quality of life. They don't want, they like the idea of working for an architecture firm that works with the local K through 12 and don't travel. I think this year will be the first year that I don't travel 200 days,
Hmm.
right? I'm like 200 days a year. That's been going on for 20 years. Right. And I have friends like, "Oh, how do you do it?" It's like, well, it's the job. It's what I signed up for. Right. This is what I do. I think for um, a lot of people, that's not the case. They want to drive to work and be at little league games, and that's good. More power to them. But I think especially if you're younger in your career, it can be very frustrating to have a boss that's in their quality of life phase, or maybe that's just where they want to be. And I think you see it in law, and I think our industry is different. You see it in law firms, you see it in accounting firms, you see it in management consulting, where the youngest teams figure out pretty quickly who's the high flyer, which is the
Mhm.
partner that's going to be CEO, and they kind of vie to work for that person. They try to work on their projects. They try to
Right.
get access to them. I don't know if we see that in AEC. I don't know if anyone's identifying the high potential architect that's going to be CEO one day and says, "Oh, I want to go hitch my wagon to that person," because there's a little bit like hitching the wagon to someone else's career.
Sure. Sure. And looking, I mean, there's the famous quote from Jim Rohn, right? You become the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. And it's, if you really sit down and unpack that, it's like, okay, well, if I want to go from here to here, and if you're listening to this, it's a little hard for the visuals here, but
Mhm.
if I want to go from this point to that point, then I have to surround myself by people that are above that point, or at least some of them, because the average, right?
Mhm.
It's math. Um, so yeah, it's leveling up to that point. It's learning from those people. It's um, hitching your wagon possibly, but opening the opportunities. My first job um, out of school about the exact same time that you're talking about.
Mhm.
I ended up working exclusively with the senior designer, and so I
Mhm.
got opportunities, Museum of Contemporary Art, and things like that, versus tilt up concrete distribution centers.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of truth to that. When we talk sometimes about your latest book, the intangible enterprise. We don't talk so much anymore about your book, What You Know About Startups Is Wrong.
Mhm.
And in that book, you tell a lot of stories from,
Yeah.
from your startup days. Similar. I don't remember if this exact story is in the book
No,
or
it's
not,
not.
but similar. So what would you pull from What You Know About Startups Is Wrong
Mhm.
into this conversation?
Yeah. So funny enough, it just got published on Audible yesterday.
There you go.
Not
How's that
available
for
on
a
Audible.
segue, everybody?
Not available on Audible. Um, I think there's two things that I pulled from that is like, I think I spent a lot of time racking my brain, like putting in the energy and effort around things that were going nowhere, and just
Mm,
was unwilling to say, like, just shut it down and move on. Right. There were a lot of companies that I started that had okay outcomes, but I should have just like shut it down. I think also, um, in my book, I talk a lot about like my personal challenges, including almost dying and stuff like that. And I think a lot of that stuff, it wasn't from, I was working hard. I work hard now. I think the difference is I work hard at kind of everything. I work hard at my health, which is, at this age is always a challenge. I work hard at getting exercise and hydrating and all that stuff. So I think when I was younger, it was work hard at work and everything else I could let slip. I think now I'm probably one of these people that works hard, plays hard. I haven't watched a TV show in a year. I mean, it's been a long time. Everybody's talking about White Lotus. I'm like, what's that? There's just certain things that I have opted out of in terms of that I consider sedentary and not adding a lot of value to my well-being. So I think there's a lot of parallels there from a lot of the stories in my book. But I think one of the things I think in being ambitious is also like knowing when to move on. And that could be a boss, a startup, or whatever. Like, hey, this startup's, I had started a consulting business and we got to be like 50 people and then I shut it down because I was like, that's not what I want. Like, I don't want to build a 1,000-person consulting company. I mean, I could, that doesn't sound like a good use of my time, so to speak. So I think there's that. But I think when you look at, you do those like performance reviews and your boss sits down with you and says, hey, where do you see yourself in 5 years? You should turn around and ask your boss, like, hey, where do you see yourself in 5 years? It's like, I need to see if you're a good fit for me.
Right. It goes both ways.
And it's interesting. I mean, I know some guy and some of the leaders in our AEC industry that are very ambitious. And I think they're fantastic leaders in our industry. But I'll tell you, like behind the scenes, I hear a lot more negative from their teams about them. Oh my gosh, he's so high energy. Oh, he's just like all over the place. Oh my gosh, he's selling work that I don't even know if we can do it. And I'm like, those are all like really positive as far as I'm concerned. Like, that sounds amazing, right? But they view it as a negative, the energy and enthusiasm around expanding and growing and learning and that kind of thing. So I think in the post I even said not just ambition but curiosity. A boss that doesn't want to keep learning, like I joke around with all you guys, right? Like, you'll never catch up. You can read all my posts. You can, I'm consuming so much more information. And you still have to catch up with all the other stuff I've already done, right? Like, so unless I just stop reading, I stop listening, I stop interacting, I just kind of go into a hole somewhere for a couple of years, then you have a chance of catching up. But as long as I'm consuming and doing, you're just not going to catch up, right? So I think even as much as ambition is like super important, I think like the curiosity aspect too. The boss that comes to you and says, hey, what do you think about AI? Hey, what do you think about this? I was reading this article, blah, blah. Those are the ones you want to hang out with.
Yeah. Yeah. At the end of the post, the last couple sentences of the post, you say, in AEC, I see a lot of innovation roles reporting to people that are not ambitious or curious, yet they stick around. So the people in those roles, they stick around. Don't do it. Move on and find a new boss or be your own boss. We know we talk about this for people that listen to this podcast. Maybe they're bruised sometimes by some of the things that we talk about, but we know that the AEC world, for all the things that we're doing here in this industry to change the world, right? Designing, building, developing, those are different, by the way, operating the places where we live, we work, we play, we worship, all of those things. For all of that, we also know that this is a pretty conservative industry. We know that oftentimes when it comes to tech, fairly laggard. And this innovation, the innovation roles that we're talking about, one of the reasons we started the Innovation Leaders Mastermind Group was because there are so few of them, and most of them are in the first they're the first of their kind. They wrote the job description, or the job description was written for them, and they're sort of forging new ground. So what do you think this looks like in the future, right? If we were to say that to all of the innovation leaders that participate in our two innovation leaders mastermind groups, where do they go? Or did they become the boss?
Yeah.
That hopefully at some point inspires the next.
Yeah, I think you saw me react. We had someone in our group that said that they had a shot to put their name in for the CEO job, and
Yeah.
they decided not to.
Right.
And I was like, "What the fuck's wrong with you? Like,
Mm-hmm.
why would you do that? Like, what do you mean?" And it's like I heard him say that. I was just like, "I don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't get it." You know. And so I think we say the word conservative a lot, right? But I think it's really complacent. I don't think it's conservative.
Okay.
Like we use these words about risk and this and that and pride that we stamp drawings like is some big deal. It's not a big deal. Really not. You know, it's made to be a bigger deal than it is. I think we use a lot of these words and we say, "Oh, it's very conservative and risk and that," but I think it's as much as it being complacent, right? And I think that's where a lot of this this narrative around like, "Oh, well, you know, you can't do that, you know, you can't grow like that." So I think for these for people that are ambitious, I think you have to decide like stay at the firm you're at, go to a different firm where the boss there is ambitious, or go do your own thing. Because I'll tell you, like I talk to a lot of these CEOs, not the founders, but CEOs of these firms, and a lot of them are very ambitious.
Mm-hmm.
And and they I will tell you, they say things like, "Yeah, you know, I stopped trying to get people to get on board. Either they do, and they're here, or they don't, and they go somewhere else, and that's
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Yeah.
You know, that's okay."
Yeah. I I think it I think it's conservative and complacent. I think the danger zone maybe is both, but the real danger zone is in the complacency.
Mhm.
That's where the blind spots are. That's where um, architects, engineers, contractors, whoever it is that we're talking about, that's where they get passed up,
Yeah.
forgotten about, disrupted.
Mhm.
I think to me that's where the real danger is,
Yeah.
the complacency.
Well, and it manifests itself. We've talked about this. It manifests itself in the business models,
Oh,
right? So
absolutely. Yeah.
the firms that complain, "Oh, hourly rate's the worst." That's not actually true for a lot of people, right? Like I always say, so a lump sum job, you have to be a good steward of your money.
Yeah.
And an hourly rate job, the customer has to be a good steward of their money.
Sure. Yeah.
I think there's plenty of people that love to camp out on projects and fill out timesheets, not, you know, call it in, right? The DOT is not reviewing your timesheet to see how fast you calculated whatever it is you were calculating.
Right.
As long as you're in your chair at your computer doing the work, you get to bill for that time. And as much as people complain about like, "Oh, this industry and the hourly rate thing," I'm like, there's a lot of people that really love the hourly rate thing
Yes.
because if it was lump sum, then they got to work differently, right? They have to be
Yes.
creative. They have to work harder. They got to do more with less in order to be profitable. But
Maybe.
I mean, if you're going to be profitable, like you try, I mean,
No. Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, where I'm
you
coming
can't
from
camp out
is
on a job, right? You can't camp out on it.
where I'm coming from is you have to understand what your costs are, and
Mhm.
this is where I see the fear for most about lump sums is, well, we're gonna throw a lump sum, and what if we go over? Well, what if you go over starts with, do you actually understand from historical data that you had from other, the last bridge project that you did or whatever it was, do you actually understand so that you can put together a legitimate, right, and accurate
Mhm.
lump sum number? That's where it starts. And yeah, sure, if you've got people sandbagging on it, then you're in trouble, certainly. But it's also where the opportunity is.
Yeah.
Hey, we understand it. Now we've incorporated this new tool where we can be more efficient. That's what you're talking about, the creativity and everything. That's where we can start to open up margin.
Mhm. But I think there's plenty of people. I mean, the engineering company I worked for, I remember people say, "Guard your job numbers." And I'm like, "Why?" Like,
People are stealing your job numbers,
people will code to your job. There are
putting it in
people
the
in the
copy machine.
they told me there were people in the company that didn't do much work, but would always, if they had a conversation with you in the hallway, they'd bill an hour to your project. They just billed the jobs. I'm like,
Hmm.
"Okay." But like, hide your job numbers. Don't let people know about them.
That's a pretty crazy culture, by the way.
I don't know that it's that different in some of these mega firms. I mean, we were kind of a mega firm, you know?
Yeah.
And if you have some IDIQ contract with federal agency where you just kind of bill hours,
Sure.
I'm just
Yeah.
saying, like, I think there are people that love the hourly rate culture.
But the thing is, Elon Musk is going to eliminate all those.
Yeah, maybe.
Send all of your mail.
Yeah, maybe. But by the way, if you want to like talk about the Elon Musk effect, right? Like, I am hearing from CEOs that are kind of like, they're telling me, they're like, "Hey, I hate the way he's coming about it, but he's probably not wrong about a lot of things in terms of
Conceptually, sure.
waste and fraud." And a lot of company CEOs are saying like, "Hey, maybe we need to have a little bit of a reckoning within our own companies about what people are doing."
Hmm.
You know, are they? And I think if you take that narrative with the return to office narrative, there's like a real question of like, what are people doing all day, right? I think there's a lot of bosses that are like, we have all these people. What do they do all day?
Hmm.
They're working from home. How do I know that they're working? How do I know that they're producing? And I think this is back to the being a very conservative industry. You could sit in your cubicle all day and produce nothing, and your boss is like, "Oh, they're working hard." You can be remote, your boss doesn't see you and produce effectively. Your boss might say like, "Oh, I don't know, that guy's never here."
Sure. Yeah. Perception, right?
Yeah,
And a boss that's not looking at the right things.
yeah. So, I mean, I think that it's a challenge. I think that's partly why we leave. You know, I've been ramping up our team, and someone asked me the other day because we've hired some really talented people, and they're like, "Well, how did you recruit that person?" I'm like, "Because they're ambitious. They want to come work for me and do ambitious things." And companies they were at were not. They
Hmm.
were not doing ambitious things. They weren't doing curious things. They weren't doing like,
Right.
"Hey, go try out these 4 AI engines and break them."
Yeah.
They didn't get it. It's like, "Oh no, I'm too busy. I got to go work on a project." Right?
Yeah. Yeah. You touched on the curiosity briefly before, but I mean, I think that's huge, right? That's curiosity fuels part of what we need as human beings.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's a big deal. And obviously that's a human need. It goes beyond the workplace, but we, when we can incorporate it in the
Yeah.
workplace, that's important. Yeah.
I I will say this too. I think I was talking to a friend. Um, they got let go from one of the big companies. They just let go of 9% of their staff, Autodesk. And interestingly enough, the biggest fear a lot of those folks are having is that they were so deep into the Autodesk system, doing
Hmm.
Autodesk things the Autodesk
Yeah.
way,
Hmm.
that their skills aren't really that transferable.
That's
That the world
interesting.
has changed, right? With AI, they still had, droves of people doing content writing and messaging and social media this and event that. And they're starting to realize as they've kind of coming out to the workforce, content writing is a part-time job because you have AI to help you out. I think being a graphic designer at a corporate these days, I don't think it was ever a great place to be. But I think it's, that stuff's like kind of tough these days, right? Like, is that a full-time job if you go to another company?
Yeah.
Someone, the specific example, they said, yeah, like I'm a master at, Adobe Illustrator. I'm finding out that outside of Autodesk, like a lot of these mid-sized companies, they're all using Canva. They're all using these other tools.
What do you think they use at Adobe?
Canva.
just curious.
But you know what I mean? Like, I think there's a little bit like the world is changing fast and people just don't.
Right.
You and I talked to some company, they'll know who they are if they listen to us.
Mm-hmm.
It was like a podcast company that would help us like manage our podcast.
Yeah.
And they started talking about sound engineers and soundboards.
Yeah.
And like we had to fly in to do it. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, this is how we do it. And it was like, you and I were like, you want us to fly in and you're gonna have a sound engineer in a booth? And are you kidding? Like, since when?
Yeah.
Since when are we doing that?
I also don't want session musicians either. I want the stars, right? I want the best guitarist. And that is it's interesting because and this, listeners may not, but we will consult at times with an architecture firm, especially now. I mean, we've been talking about this a lot. Everybody thinks they need a podcast now. I don't disagree with them. But we've got to be very clear on what the goals are, et cetera. And so we'll do a lot of consulting on, hey, how do I get this started? What equipment do I need? And, all of this. And recently I was talking with a firm leader and said, hey, gather up all the responses to your RFP, if you will, and I'll help you analyze them. I'll go through and we can mark out the things you don't need, circle the things you do need, because, and it's what's to me, specifically in the podcasting world, is this is not new, right? We record right now on StreamYard. And we're not getting paid or sponsored by StreamYard. We use this. It's not a new platform, but it eliminates the need for us to fly around. Right? Their technology is decent. I mean, it's good enough that you're listening to this right now. Riverside's a great example as well. They started in two different places, but probably two different desired outcomes would decide which one of those you pick. But like you said, whether it's graphic design or it's content writing or it's producing podcasts or whatever, I mean, the need for change and keeping up and upskilling and all of those buzzwords that we love, that's more necessary every single day.
Well, so that's kind of an interesting thing to think about, right? Do you think in the new AI driven world, which we're seeing like every day something amazing happening?
Yeah. Yep.
It's like happening at that level. Do you think you actually can have a job if you're not ambitious?
Do I think you can actually have a job if you're not ambitious? Yes. It's going to take a long time for AI to replace all of this. 10 years from now, I don't know. Do I think, I mean, to me, we've talked about this before. We talk about this in terms of our mastermind groups and other places. To me, everything comes down to growth mindset. Right? Do you have a growth mindset? Are you willing? And this is This is job, this is relationship, this is personal. You're talking about health and things like that. If you don't have a growth mindset, and the way I think about growth and mindsets is there's three lenses.
Mm-hmm.
There's personal growth, there's relationship growth, there's business, career, professional, however you need to couch work.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have a growth mindset in all those, and I think you need at least those three lenses for a holistic person. If you don't have a growth mindset in each of those, you're in trouble, right? If you don't have a growth mindset in terms of your health, you're in trouble. Maybe not today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Eventually. If you don't in relationships, you're in trouble, right?
Yeah.
If you don't in work, again, whatever that realm looks like, you're in trouble. If you're at Autodesk and you're using Adobe, first of all, that's got to be a punchline. There's like a bartender in there somewhere. But if you're at Autodesk and you're using Adobe rather than Canva, and you can't even get a job at Adobe because they're using Canva, that's telling, right?
Or more so, like, it's because your job is, I'm in charge of creating the signage at our events, and I use all these templates, and I'm happy with that job. I'm happy with things coming to the inbox. I do my things. I complain about how busy I am, first of all,
Mm-hmm.
and then I
George
upload
Costanza.
them to a shared folder. Like, that's my job. Things come in, I do some process, and then. But if you're not ambitious and curious, like, it was interesting. I was out with one of my investors, and they own, like, I don't know, 50,000, 70,000 apartment units. And he's like, you know what? The best thing that he got out of the pandemic was he started coming into the office because he wasn't traveling as much.
Hmm.
He's like,
Okay.
I found out I have 4 people whose job is to open checks and put them in the right folders
Mm-hmm.
for someone else to deposit.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, that was my reaction. Because what's funny is people think that, like, the old guy CEO, and he's a little bit of an older gentleman, that they're not aware of innovation and technology. They're very aware. It's just that if their operations working, they don't worry about it. And if they're too busy flying around on their private jets, they're definitely not thinking about how they take in checks, right? They just assume they have someone in place that is looking at that. And so he just told me, he's like, yeah, I walked around the office as we started getting back into the office after the pandemic. I'm walking around. I'm around. Well, we have 4 people whose jobs are to, like, go through the mail, get rent checks, and post them and put them in folders for someone else to post to the right property. He was like, I was blown away and I'm like, what'd you do about it? He's like, I fired 3 of them.
I'm blown away that they got checks.
No,
It's another episode.
apartment dwellers. Yeah, there's the whole thing, right? If you live in an apartment, it's unless you're using one of our platforms like Magic Door or something else, or Stake, you're probably paying by check at the leasing office. Still very
Okay.
prevalent. So anyway, but there are these jobs that exist that are like,
Sure.
my job is to open up checks. Now, what I'll tell you is anybody that's been in that job for a minute is probably not that ambitious at their work life or curious.
Sure.
Like, in other words, if I was an ambitious, curious person, I was given the task, maybe it's an entry-level task, to open up checks and put them in folders. I'm like, why are we doing this? There's got to be a better way to do this. Like, I'm going to try to find a way to do it better and replace myself so I can do something else. They had 4 people doing this full time. And I was just like, this is wild. And he was like, yeah. So my question around, like, if you are not ambitious and you're not curious, I don't think you have 10 years.
Well, no, probably not at the speed that we're moving now. I do think it depends on the role.
Yeah.
But we're moving at a speed now that's, of course, is faster than ever.
Yeah.
The same thing could have been said about
we're teetering on a recession, if not already in one.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll tell you, like, here in California, every fast food place, not even fast food, like quick serve, like burrito
Mhm.
joints now, they'll have kiosks. It's all kiosks. Nobody takes
Yeah,
your order.
right.
Nobody takes your order.
Yeah. But the same thing would have been said at one point about the person that laced the spokes on a wheel of a Model A Ford,
Mhm.
right? I mean, it's that's that's been a constant throughout, since the Industrial Revolution,
Mhm.
right? But it's the speed now. It's the speed, and I think also the drasticity is probably not a word. What's the word I want? I don't know. But it's the drasticness of the change, I think is the real key now. It's moving very quickly and the change is vast. Um, and yes, if you are one of four that are sitting in an office and all you're doing is opening checks, again, I have questions. Um, but if that's all you do, yeah, it's not going to take long.
You don't think there's people at other companies that have those kind of jobs? I'm sure there's a lot more of them. I think we have different optics on the world. I think there's a lot of companies where there's someone sitting at a desk, opening envelopes and sitting next to the paper shredder for an hour a day, like just all this stuff, right?
Yeah, there probably are. I don't. What's an envelope?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think our optics are
Yeah,
off. We're a bit
right.
myopic to our world.
Yes, yeah, definitely true. The You started out this post talking about your first job, and now we're talking about people's next job or last job, maybe.
Mhm.
The post goes like this: In my first engineering job, I walked into my boss's office and resigned. He responded, "It's about time." He always understood my ambition because it matched his own. At some point, he said that my ambition was exceeding his ambition, and he knew that he was holding me back. Your ambitions should be clear to your boss. If your boss isn't at least as equally ambitious as you, find a new boss. In AEC, I see a lot of innovation roles reporting to people that are not ambitious or curious, which has been a big point of our conversation here, especially towards the end. Yet, they stick around. Don't do it. Move on and find a new boss or be your own boss. All right. I think we could probably do another episode on this. We're going to wrap it up right here. As you're listening to this, let us know what you think. Wherever you're listening to this or watching this comes out in a variety of different mediums. Wherever it is that you're consuming this, drop into the comments your thoughts, your questions, your challenges to what we're talking about. If you have them, let us know if your job is opening envelopes or putting checks in folders. We want to know who you are. Not to call you out or put you on the spot, but also know that everything that we've talked about that needs or deserves a link will be in the show notes down below, whether this is an audio wave or it's a video. Our production team will be putting the links in the show notes below. So thank you for listening. We do this every week. Every week I get to ask KP, hey, what were you thinking when you posted that on LinkedIn? This has been fun. It is. We were talking about this before we went live. It is fun, talking about the personal stories,
Mhm.
the personal experiences. So, look forward to hearing more of these, and also all the different formats of this Unpacked podcast. As soon as KP and I log off here, I'm going to log on with Frank Lazaro from our team, another senior advisor, and he and I are going to unpack some AI tools. And next week, I'll be unpacking some posts with some of our mastermind members. There's lots of different formats that we're rolling out of this Unpacked podcast. So I hope that you'll give them all a listen. I hope you'll let us know what you think, what you want to hear more of. Let us know what your questions, your comments, your thoughts are in the comments wherever you're consuming this. And we'll be back again next week.
And I think
Appreciate you for
we are
listening.
still the number one podcast in AEC, I think.
As far as we're concerned, we always will be.
Yeah. So just tune in here. You don't need to go anywhere else.
All the rest of them are stuffing envelopes using Adobe.
No, they're all showing up to a studio with a sound engineer.
With a session musician.
Yeah. Jeez.
Yeah. We've got real drummers. All right, everybody. We appreciate you. Thank you for listening. KP, thanks. Great to see you again and talk with you. And we'll see you next week.